and good morning. Today's topic, not that others are not, but today's topic will probably be challenging for some people. I hope to be able to explain something that may not be easy to comprehend for a lot of people. The title that I've chosen is 2012, Paradox and the Mystical Mind. My former mentor, Dr. Bruce Morgan, used to repeat a Jung quote fairly often in his lectures. The inordinate number of spiritual weaklings makes paradoxical truth dangerous. While I know that many are awakening, it is still difficult for many to embrace the paradox that results from living in a world of duality or multiplicity. There are always two or more perspectives, each being correct from that viewpoint. Unfortunately, this does not make sense to many, which is why we must expand our consciousness. This topic was precipitated by a response to my video from yesterday, in which one of my friends, who comes to some of my meetings and who has interacted with me a lot over the years, wrote this. He said, "I agree to hold our leaders in a compassionate place in my heart. I just don't understand how to do that when I also know that you will, tomorrow or the next day, have a message to do the opposite. This has been your example for the year that I have watched. I have to either stay in the love lane or the hate-fear lane. Going back and forth is indeed like what it says in the book of James, being tossed to and fro on the seas with no balance and double-minded." And I quoted the inordinate number, the Jung quote, back to him. And I'm meditating on that here this morning. And I realize that he's not going to like being called a spiritual weakling. And what it's not saying in that quotation is that you're stupid. It's not making anybody stupid. But we are, all of us, have been and are to some extent still spiritual weaklings. Because it takes the ability to put yourself in someone else's moccasins, as the old Indian proverb says, and be able to see from over there in order to be able to love. And I will get to the political implications of what he says about being in the love lane or the hate and fear lane. I'll explain that later. But yesterday I came across a video of a husband who was driving in the car and making a YouTube video. He asked his wife a very simple question. If I'm traveling 80 miles per hour, how long will it take me to go 80 miles? Now, for most people, men or women, there's only one logical answer. His wife took over 4 minutes to try to explain that it depended on the inflation of the tires, and she brought in numerous other factors in order to try to come up with an answer. She came up with an answer 58 minutes, which I thought was humorous. If there was stopping and stuff like that, if she was figuring that into the equation, it would have been longer than an hour. But she actually came up with a number under an hour. And he said, it's close. The point that I'm making is this. We all stand in the place of our own experience, the things that we've learned, the things that we believe, and we have the tendency as human beings to live in our ego and think that our present point of view or our present viewpoint is the only correct one. God forbid that anybody look at it from a different angle and explain it in a different manner. That's what the mystical mind is able to do. The mystical mind sees and perceives and thinks from numerous perceptions. What if? That's what the question was a couple of days ago. What if? What if? What if? What if I was looking at it from over here or over there? I'm going to see it differently. And a spiritual weakling is a person that's unable to put themselves in the other moccasins, that's unable to imagine that, hey, if I was standing at the leg of the elephant, it would feel like a tree. So the guy that's feeling it and it says it's like a big fire hose isn't incorrect. He's just perceiving it from in a different location. Of course, I'm using the 5 blind men and the elephant allegory when I refer to the tree and the hose. These are illustrative of the nature and complexity of trying to understand each other. Only in the mystical mind, when we're able to see, to rise above and to see all the perceptions, can we really love. Love is going into the mystical mind. It is embracing the paradox. It is integrating the opposites. One of the arguments that this gentleman has had with me is in regard to the ego. And many people on the spiritual path say if you're in your mind, you're in your ego, and you're not in truth. You're not in unity. Well, that's not true. That's not true. From personal experience, I know that I can be totally in my mind and in my heart at the same time. I can feel fear and I can be loving at the same time. They are not mutually exclusive. That's the fundamentalist thinking, that everything has to be mutually exclusive. It has to be either this or that. It can't be both. No, the mystical mind, it is both and more. This is the hard thing to try to get through to people that think, well, here I am. I'm looking at this, and this is what I believe to be true, and you're saying something different, so you must be wrong. No. That's where all the confusion and conflict comes from. That's why we don't allow the dance, because we think that only the masculine role is the right one, or only the feminine role is the right one. Actually, you need both the masculine and the feminine role. You need both the ego and the self, or the higher self. You need both, because that's what creation has given us, and all parts are necessary. We do not become whole by rejecting our ego or any other part of our being, by rejecting our sexuality or sensuality. We do not become whole by segmenting and cutting and dividing and putting. It's okay to analyze things that way. It's perfectly okay. But we don't become whole by pushing parts out of the picture and say, well, this isn't important. No, it's all important. That's what the mystical mind sees. That's what my mind has seen for a very long time. I've been teaching about embracing the paradox and integrating opposites since the 80s. Since the early 80s in my poetry, I have seen this. And it makes perfect sense to me. And yet I know how much I've been attacked over the years by individuals who can't see it from that bigger picture, who can only see it from the little picture. Now, what about the political leaders? What about them? I said we need to hold them in a place of compassion. Indeed, from the highest perspective, from the spiritual perspective, that is true. We are to love our enemies. Are they really enemies? Or are they actually allies, revealing to us a part of ourselves that we don't recognize yet? So we're shown it out there. But ultimately, we have to see it in here. I've seen people wax eloquent about the faults they see in someone else. And I listen to them and chuckle sometimes because I can see the same fault that they're criticizing in another in them. But they can't yet. Yet. And so, as I said, I chuckle because I know down the road they're going to say, wait a minute. I'm criticizing this person, but I have a tendency to do the same thing I'm criticizing in him or her. And the politicians, they are playing a role. And from the spiritual perspective, when you recognize that it's a role, it's easy to hold them in a place of compassion. They have been programmed to play that role, which is why you can be compassionate, which is why you can be forgiving. If you're only standing in one place looking at what they're doing and saying, this is terrible. Look at, they've killed all these Libyans, or speaking of Obama, he's killed all these Libyans and he's unleashed all this and all that. The same thing with George Bush and all of our leaders. They've done acts of absolute atrocity. From the spiritual perspective and holding them in a place of love, we can embrace them. But from the human perspective, they have committed atrocities and there must be recompense. There must be retribution. It's not an eye for an eye, but it's justice. We have to be able to see justice meted out, or otherwise nothing makes sense from the human perspective. From the divine perspective, nobody ever did anything wrong. But from the human perspective, that sure isn't true, is it? Which is what all of the arguments that come at me from. Well, yes, from your perspective, you're right. And from your perspective, I'm wrong. But from my perspective, it's all right. It's both and all else included. That's the mystical mind. I don't know if I was blessed with that or cursed with that. I know it certainly brought a lot of disagreements, a lot of arguments, a lot of misunderstandings throughout my lifetime. Paradox man. Well, if you keep using that word, I was told many years ago, your life is going to be filled with conflict. In fact, do I have it laying here somewhere? Yeah, I do. Bruce Morgan. This is my book, Living Gods Are Hard to Find. On the back cover, it has a long quote from Bruce Morgan. I might have read this once before. But I sent him a copy of this and told him I was trying to get it actually published with a publisher. And he wrote, let me just say who he is. Bruce Morgan was the president of the Bible Institute of New England and the vice president of the Fundamentalist Churches of America. He was a professor, taught in college and lectured all over the Northeast, and then he moved to Florida just before I did, and he was actually moving to Wyoming. As I was moving to Florida, he was moving to Wyoming. But anyway, just to give you his background, he wrote, I love the title of your book and the first page, the cover, with its symbology. I thought it was really well done. I found myself shouting approval and rejoicing greatly. It is poetry with power. I really liked your prose, your introductory pieces. You have an ability with a pen, and I hope to God that these people publish this. Not only do you have a spirit for truth, a commitment and dedication to truth, but you have an excellent philosophical mind. Your insight into the polarities has blessed me. It's a very, very difficult subject, and I do think you're on the right track with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You have a difficult task. You will continue to pay a price in agonia. You will continue to develop, you will need to continue to develop a tough-minded attitude. Do not expect establishmentarians to embrace you with open arms. Anyone who speaks the things you speak, anyone like you, is a total threat to everything they stand for. Indeed, I've seen that that's true. It doesn't matter if I'm in a religious circle or whatever circle I'm in. I'm coming up against people who are unable to see from a different perspective and understand that the answer is not the same answer from both positions. It's a different answer, and it's a true answer. That's what a paradox is. A paradox seems, when you're standing in one position, and somebody is standing in another position, and they're saying, this is true, and you're saying, I'm looking at it right here. It's obviously not true. And you label it a contradiction, or you label the person double-minded, or tossed to and fro with no balance, as my friend indicated in his paraphrase from the book of James in the Bible. But it is true. They're both true. We must be compassionate to our leaders, and yet at the same time, we must hold them accountable for the evil that they have done. That's not a contradiction. That is balancing the scales. It is dealing with both aspects, the spiritual and the human aspect, or the physical aspect. It is dealing with both aspects in the equation. This is what we have to do as we awaken in this 2012 year. And as we move forward, we must get to the place where we're able to see the bigger picture, embracing the paradox, integrating the opposites, and becoming whole within ourselves, understanding that the ego is both our friend and our enemy. It depends where you're looking at it from. You can make every enemy an ally if you're willing to expand your mind and open your heart and trust your gut. This is the spiritual path. It's big. It's a multiplicity of perspectives. And the glue that holds it all together is our ability and our willingness to love one another, because we are ultimately all one. Namaste.